Okay, so today we will start the third part of our lecture on calculus. Remember, part 1 was about limits and continuity, part 2 about differentiation, and part 3 will be about integration, or more precisely, single variable integration. So where does the notion of integration starting from? It starts from the so-called area problem. Okay, so imagine that we are given some curve y equal f of x, and the problem is that, so what is the area problem? We want to find the area of the region that lies between the x-axis and the curve y equal f of x when x goes from A to B. Okay? So we would like to calculate this area between the x-axis and the curve. Now, a remark, the first good remark that we can have about this, we know what is the area of a rectangle. Okay? The area of a rectangle is basically, if you remember, the length of this rectangle times the width. So, an idea is we're going to try to approximate the area by rectangles So this is the first idea. Idea number 1 is to try to approximate the area by some rectangle, right? So for example, you could consider this rectangle, okay? And you would say, well, it's not so far from our area, so it's pretty good. The second idea is to approximate the area by more and more rectangles, yeah. So instead of, this would give an approximation, but we can do a little better. So if we take very small, okay, so for example here, we will take one rectangle, and then here we will take a second one, and then here we will take another one, and then here we take another one, etc., etc., okay? And we take more and more of these. This is if you combine these two ideas, you will get finally the procedure of a mathematician, German mathematician of 19th century called Riemann. Okay, so let's see now what is the so-called definite integral of Riemann. So this is basically a solution to the area problem, right? By combining the two ideas. Okay, so here we are going to assume that f of x is positive, like in my drawing. I was calculating area between x-axis and the curve was above. And so let's put ourselves in this condition, and we will compute this area for x between A and B. So the method is that we cut the interval AB in n parts. So the translation of more and more rectangle, right? In fact, we are going to take a limit of in n of some rectangles of very, very small length and width, okay? So we cut the interval AB in n parts. Let's say that A is, for example, x1, and then we have x2, 3 dot, then we have xn plus 1, this will be our B, okay? So if you do that, you have cut your interval in n parts. And then we choose arbitrarily, so as we want, arbitrarily, we will choose some values that I will call xi, and they will be taken in each closed interval xi plus 1, and then we set delta of xi to be the length of each sub-interval, xi plus 1 xi, okay? And now we set S to be the summation. So this is this symbol, I don't know if you have seen it before, but it means the sum for I equal 1 to n of the following value. You will consider f xi times delta xi. So one represents, you see, the length, and the other the width of the rectangle. Okay, so you will calculate basically, yeah, so if we make a drawing, okay, we have A and B, and then we have chosen this was x2, x3, x4, etc. And then in between you have picked some xi. So xi, this is xi1, okay? And then you pick another one, xi2, okay? And then you will calculate the area between A and x2, which has for length this f of xi1, right? And then etc. You will, here you will calculate f of xi2, so you will take this rectangle, here this rectangle, etc., etc. Okay, so you will approximate this way, and then you take the summation of all these different rectangles, and you will get an approximation of your area, isn't it? Okay. Now take more and more intervals, and we end up with our definition. First definition, the definite integral of a function f between A and B is given by limit when n goes to infinity of this sum for I equal 1 to n f xi times delta xi. So you consider this, and you call it the definite integral of f between a and b. Few remarks. The first is that this definition makes sense even when f of x is negative, right? It will make sense. It will calculate, for example, if your curve is here, it will calculate the area on below the x-axis, okay? But it will give a negative value, okay? So negative of this will be the area of the region between x and your curve, okay? So it exists even when it's negative, when f is negative. Another remark is that if f is continuous on I didn't I will precise this later, but I could give the notation, sorry. When this limit exists, we denote it by integral. This symbol is a kind of S, long S. Here you write the bound of your interval a and b, f of x dx. It's purely a notation, okay? It just means this, okay? When it exists, because it's a limit, you know that a limit does not necessarily always exist, right? The remark 2 is about existence of this. So when f is continuous on AB, except at a finite number of points, then integral AB f of x dx exists. And it is independent of the choices. So, as you can see, to write this formula, we picked some value xi, x1, xn, so a sequence of real number, right? And we picked inside each interval some value. So we did two choices, these two choices. And in fact, one can show that if you pick another sequence, and if you pick other value xi, then you will get the same result. This is a difficult result that we won't prove. Okay, it's not obvious at all, but it's true. Okay. Now, because of this remark and saying that it's independent of the choice, it means that we can choose a special splitting of the interval AB. Okay? We don't need to pick randomly this value x1, x2, and x1, x2. We can do it in a more easy way. So, since the definition is independent of the choices, we can define the definite integral as follows. By picking in a special way this xi and this xi. Okay, so this is definition 2, but it will define actually the same value, which is a non-trivial fact. It's non-trivial that it will give the same value, but it does. And we define this as the limit when n goes to infinity of the sum of the fxi delta x I equal 1 to n, okay? And here I'm going to take xi to be defined as a plus I times delta x. And delta x will be constant value. Delta x will be b minus a divided by n. So I cut my interval, instead of cutting by rectangles of different lengths, arbitrary lengths, I will cut in equal subintervals. So I will cut in n subintervals of equal length, and this length will be b minus a divided by n. And then I make a recipe to pick some value xi, and then I don't use this xi between xi and xi plus 1, but I just take xi to be xi. Okay, so very simple. So this definition is more practical than the other one. Okay. All right. So it's quite difficult actually to prove that this definition 1 coincides with definition 2, but it is actually the case. And moreover, as a bonus, I give you the existence. Well, existence will be ensured as soon as the function is continuous, except at possibly a finite number of points. Okay, then it will exist. This is also difficult to prove. Now, defining this, what are the properties of this new value, the integral? Okay, so let's see the properties. So the first property is that the integral between a and b of the constant zero function, this will be actually 0. The second property is that the integral between a and b of f of x dx will be equal to minus the integral between b and a. So reversing the bound of the interval, you will get a minus f of x dx. And then 3, the integral between a and a of f of x dx will be 0. Property 4. Property 4, the integral between a and b of the constant function, a function equal to c, will be c times b minus a. Yeah, so it's just a rectangle with b minus a and height c, so it's very obvious. Property, sorry, so this was 4. Then property 5 says that the integral between a and b of f of x plus or minus g of x and everything times dx will be equal to the addition or subtraction of the two integral gx dx. Yeah. 6. The integral between a and b of c times f of x dx will be c times the integral of f of x dx. Property 7. If you consider the integral between a and c of f of x dx plus the integral between c and b of f of x dx, then this will be equal to the integral between a and b of f of x dx. Right. Now, 8. If f of x is greater than 0, then so is its integral. Right, as we have seen, this definite integral is in the case where f of x is greater than 0, the interpretation is the area of a region, so it must be a positive value. And 9, if f of x is greater than g of x, then the integral of f of x dx will be greater or equal than the integral between a and b of g of x dx. 10, if your function is bounded on the left by some value small m and on the right by some capital M, then you get the following bound for the integral. So the integral of f will be bounded on the left by m times b minus a, and on the right by capital M times b minus a. Okay, so 10 properties, and so let me give you a very quick sketch of proof. So this is clear by definition. Just use the definition and you will see that if your function is 0, then you will get anyways a 0 value. What about b? So condition 2 is also clear by definition. You can use even definition 2. Yeah, you can use definition 2. The delta x will be minus. So this delta x between b and a will be minus times the delta x here, and then you have to put another minus to get the same equality. So this is very clear. Now, also clear by definition, because delta x in this case is 0. Here, a and a. And here, this is just the area of the rectangle. So this is very clear with width and b minus a and length c. So this is all clear. 5. 5, this is, here you apply, so basically all these laws here, these two, you apply limit laws, the corresponding limit laws. Remember that this definite integral is defined as a limit, okay? So you just apply the plus minus limit law and the multiplication by a constant, and you will get the result. So here, well, this is also very simple. The explanation is just that if you cut, you have A and C and B, and then you calculate this area plus this area, then the area between A and B will be the sum of the two areas. So this area S is equal to S1 plus S2. This is S1, this is S2. Yeah. So this is very easy to understand. Also here you can see the interpretation of the integral as the area of the region between the x-axis and the curve. So this is trivial. And for this one, you apply by 8. You apply 8 to the function f of x minus g of x. Yeah, you just apply 8 to this f of x minus g of x, and you get immediately the result. And then here you apply 9. You apply 9, and you will apply also, so you will have 4. Okay, you apply 9 and 4, and you will get the proof immediately. Okay, so these properties are very easy to check actually. Okay, so first of all, we have defined this integral, and we call it for the moment definite integral, and it comes from the genius of the mathematician Riemann. So this mathematician realized that to calculate the area between an axis and a curve, you just need to approximate by some rectangles and more rectangles. Okay, that's all. Now you have another approach, and this is called the indefinite integral. Okay, so it's a priori something completely different, but at the end we will show that this actually gives the same result. So let's see what is an indefinite integral. So, definition 3. Let capital F and small f, two functions defined on some open interval AB, such that if you derive the capital F, you get f, small f. And this equality should hold on the open interval. And then capital F is called an anti-derivative and we have another terminology, so either antiderivative or indefinite integral of f on AB. So, yeah. Antiderivative, you see, it's because capital F, the derivative of capital F is F, so it's a kind of reciprocal of the derivative, right? But it's right now it's difficult to understand why it is also called indefinite integral. Why integral? We cannot see any connection right now with the previous notion of definite integral. Okay, so we will study later why it can be called like some kind of integral. Okay, so proposition. Remark a word here. I have written I didn't say the antiderivative, but I called it an antiderivative, which inclined to think that there might be several antiderivatives. Okay, so let's check this. So let's G be an antiderivative of F, or we could say another antiderivative of F, then G equal capital F plus some constant C. And reciprocally, if G equal F plus C and F, capital F, is an antiderivative, of F, then G is also an antiderivative. So this proposition is saying basically that we don't have unicity of the antiderivative. If you have one antiderivative, you take this antiderivative plus any constant and you will get another one, okay? So you have many antiderivatives. The proof of that, okay, so if we want to prove in this direction, this is the most easy, so we have G equal F plus C and F antiderivative. So this implies, of course, that the derivative of G prime will be the derivative of F plus C, but by the law of derivation, we know that this is equal to F prime plus 0, and so this is equal to F. Okay, so this direction, the proof is very easy. Now, what happened for the other direction? Now, in this other direction, we need to prove, so we have two antiderivatives. Of F, antiderivatives of F, okay? So what does it mean? It just means that F prime equal G prime equal small f, okay? But then if we do that, this implies that F prime minus G prime is equal to 0, isn't it? Which implies that F prime, so F minus G prime will be equal to 0, which means that F minus G is a constant. Yeah. So this was the corollary 1 to MVT, by the way. This was proved here. So we can actually use the MVT to prove this. Okay, and this finishes the proof of the proposition. So let me give you a notation for this antiderivative. Yeah, so the antiderivative will be denoted like this. Yeah, no bound here, okay? No bound. This just means that this f of x is an antiderivative. And yeah, you can see the sign integral, but we cannot still understand really from the definition why this is related to the previous, to our definition 1 and 2, okay? Now, calculation of the antiderivative. It's not so hard to prove that the antiderivative of x to the n is xn plus 1 divided by n plus 1 plus c. The antiderivative of sine x dx is minus cos x plus the constant c, while the antiderivative of cos x dx is sine x plus c. And the antiderivative of the exponential is dx, sorry, is exponential plus c. Another one, yeah, so for example, what is the antiderivative of a times f of x plus b g of x dx? Well, this will be just a times the antiderivative of small f plus b times the antiderivative capital G of small g. And you will have another constant. Another formula. What is the antiderivative of f prime of x divided by f of x dx? This will be the logarithm of the absolute value of f of x plus c. So, in particular, this formula tells us that the antiderivative of 1 over x dx is actually logarithm of absolute value of x plus c. Never forget the absolute value, okay? And the integral of f x to the power n times f prime of x dx, this will be equal to 1 over n plus 1 f of x, the antiderivative of f to the power n plus 1, and this plus c. And antiderivative of tangent x dx, this is the minus logarithm of absolute value of cos x plus c. Do I want to give you more? No, I'm going to stop here, but so you see, proof. To prove integral of fx dx equal capital F of x plus c, we just need to prove that f prime of x is equal to f of x. That's all, okay? So you just take any formula, one of these formula, and you basically derive this here, and you should find what is inside, okay? That's how we can prove every single of these formula, okay? So it's very easy. This will be an exercise. You can prove it just by using derivation of the antiderivative. All right. Now, the big mystery is why one is called indefinite integral. Why antiderivative? That makes sense. Okay, the antiderivative is kind of opposite of the derivative, so it's logical we call it the antiderivative. But why is it called indefinite integral and denoted as an integral? This notation. Why? This we are going to answer this question right now. And the answer to this question is given by the so-called fundamental theorem of calculus. So we could call it the FTC, isn't it? FTC, the fundamental theorem of calculus. So if it's fundamental, it's probably very important, isn't it? And this theorem just gives you the answer to why antiderivative is called indefinite integral. Okay? So this theorem comes in two parts. So FTC, we have two parts. Part one, it says that if f is continuous on some closed interval AB, then the integral between a and x f of t dt, so call it capital F of x, this is an antiderivative of f on AB. So basically, you can calculate the antiderivative by using the previous definition, the definite integral, but between a and some variable x. So it becomes a function. And this will give you the antiderivative. So you can see the link between antiderivative and definite integral. Yeah, when you have a continuous function, you get the antiderivative by using the definite integral. And the second part of this statement is that, again, if f is continuous on AB, and so with antiderivative, with an antiderivative, remember that we can have several antiderivative capital F, then you can calculate the definite integral in terms of the antiderivative by the following formula. So the definite integral, okay, because if I write down here the bounds, it means that I'm using definition 1 or 2, definite, okay? And this will be equal to what? It will be just f of b minus capital F of b minus capital F of a. And this notation, this will be, we will use the following notation. This will be denoted between this bracket, and you put here the bounds, x equal a b. Okay, this is just a notation. This means this. Okay. Yeah. So this 1 and 2 give you really the intricate relationship between definite and indefinite integral. Okay. In 1, you can construct the antiderivative from the definite. In 2, you can construct the definite integral from the antiderivative, and they give you the recipe. Okay, so it's very beautiful theorem, and let's have a look of how this is actually proved. The proof of this theorem is not that difficult. First, we are going to prove 2, okay? So, in 2, we want to calculate the definite integral, right? So, we divide AB into n sub-intervals. So, we will use definition 2, right? Sub-intervals. So x0 will be A and xn equal B, and then we will take delta x to be b minus a divided by n, okay? And then we can write fb minus f of a. This will be, of course, this will be equal to f of xn, isn't it? And then you can do f minus xn minus 1 plus fxn minus 1, right? So minus plus, it's like you do nothing, etc. Plus fxn, so you can do again fxn minus 1 plus fxn minus 2, etc. And then doing this, you will end up by f of a, okay? And so you can basically write fb minus fa just as the summation for I equal 1 to n of fxi minus fxa minus 1. Yes, basically you can write it this way. Now, this function, capital F, is continuous. It's continuous because it's differentiable, okay? So it's continuous on each xi minus 1, since it is differentiable. Right, so continuous and differentiable, so we can apply the MVT theorem. So the MVT, what did it say? It will say that there exists some xi, and this xi will be in the open interval, such that basically you will get f of xi minus f of xi minus 1, okay? This will be equal to f prime of xi times xi minus xi minus 1. Yeah, I reformulate slightly the MVT. The MVT would be that this divided by this is equal to this, but it's basically the same, isn't it? Okay, so here I'm proving 2. Huh? Yeah, so I'm trying to prove this formula. And how to finish? Okay, it's a pity to erase statement 1, so I would like to avoid this. And then you take, so basically, sorry, let me read carefully. So, yes. Yeah. So this guy is just f prime ci times delta x, isn't it? You see? So basically, you have showed that f of b minus f of a is equal to the sum for I equal 1 to n of f xi delta x, and then you can take the limit when n goes to infinity, okay, on each side, and so this is a constant. So this will give you f of b minus f of a, and this is just the definite integral. Okay, that's how you get your proof of the statement 2. Now I want to keep the statement 1, so I'm going to erase this. Okay, so here I have proved part 2. Now how to prove part 1? So as you can see, this fundamental theorem of calculus is using our incredibly powerful MVT theorem. So MVT is the key here. Okay, so now we prove statement 1. Statement 1 is saying that I can calculate the antiderivative from a definite integral. So I'm claiming that this is an antiderivative. So what do I need to prove? We want to show basically that f prime of x is equal to small f of x, right? That's all we need to prove. So I'm going to consider x and x plus h in the open interval AB. H will be a positive value and small enough such that x plus h is still in AB if x is in AB. Then let's calculate. So I want to calculate the derivative. So what is a derivative? Well, I need to calculate basically this value and divide later by h. So first of all, let's try this. So this one will be the integral between and x plus h of f of t dt. Okay, this this I can just apply 2, right? I apply 2 and minus the integral between a and x of f of t. No, sorry. Here I just apply the definition. Yeah, I'm just here using the definition. This is just definition. T. Yeah, this is definition. And then by property 2 of the definite integral, yeah, if I use the property 2, I can say that this is equal to, so this minus can be rewritten as the integral from x to a, actually, of ft dt, and then plus integral from a to x plus h of f of t dt. And so this was property 7. Property 7 this time. I know that I can rewrite this as the integral between x and x plus h of f of t dt. Okay, so basically, yeah, where am I now? I have showed so far that f of x plus h minus f of x, and then now let's divide by h. This will be the integral between x and x plus h, f of t dt, and then I divide by h. Now let's consider the EVT theorem, extreme value theorem. Then I can conclude. So remember, I just want to show f prime of x equal f of x, okay? So now using the EVT, I know that there exists some u and v in the closed interval x plus h, such that f of u will be a global mean, okay? So I just know this by continuity, right? And this is a continuous function, so I can apply the theorem. So I'm sure that there will be a global mean and a global max. So this u will be the global mean, and f of v will be, sorry, so yeah, this is this is u, and my v will be the global max. Okay, now by property, so property 10, what does it say? It says that if my function is between m and m, then the integral will be between, so this integral, x plus h f of x dx, will be between mh and capital M times h. And so this is f of u, okay? F of u times h, right? So now this is f of v times h, okay? Now I'm going to deduce that if I do x plus h f of x dx, I divide by h, okay? And this will give, when h goes to 0, this will give me the definition, by definition, f prime of x, okay? So I calculate this. This will be between what? Between f of u and between f of v, because I can cancel out this h with this h, okay? So when h, now let's look what happens when h goes to 0. Well, this is a constant, isn't it? So this is a constant, and f of u, so u belongs to x and x plus h, you see? And h goes to 0, which means that u goes to x. So this goes to f of x, because there is no other value possible for u. U belongs to the closed interval x and x plus h, and h goes to 0. So between x and x, basically. So this goes to f of x, and this, for the same reason, because it belongs to the same interval, and that there, when h goes to 0, there is only one possible value, which is x, so it converges also to f of x. And by the squeeze theorem, so the squeeze theorem tells us that this, which is definitely f prime of x, will be between these two values, f of x, small f of x and small f of x, therefore equal. So it's an absolutely beautiful proof that is using MVT, EVT, and the properties of the definite integral. Okay, so next time, we still have a lot to do. We will study basically the basic rule of integration, and we will have another lecture about improper integrals and partial fraction. So that's all for today. Thank you.